Hello, everyone. Welcome to Briar Haus Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and today it is my honor to be able to have acclaimed Western poet, author, um, amazing cowboy with us today. His name is Doc Mehl, and he's pretty amazing. In 2013, his CD, The Great Divide, won Cowboy Poetry CD of the Year. In 2020, he began his first collection of poetry called Good Medicine, Read Two Poems and Call Me in the Morning. He's just amazing. Welcome to our program, Doc.
Thanks very much, Becky. Pleasure to be here.
Doc, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I will tell you a little bit about myself. The I come to my songwriting and my poetry writing quite in a very meandering lifetime fashion. So I had a career that was not a writer or a poet or a songwriter or a singer.
Mhm.
Well, it's if you're going to be a singer-songwriter, it's good to have a day job, and I had a day job. I had a good day job. And I'm going to actually expand on that a little bit because I know one of your thoughts for today's questions was about my nickname, Doc, and how I came by that. So I think I'll start there. It turns out I had a career as a physician.
Ah,
I worked as a pediatrician for a career. I worked in Colorado for the duration of that career. And along the way, I played music. I played music in school. When I went off to college, I'd arrange a little Christmas carol and whatever instruments were on the dormitory wing. If there was a saxophone and a clarinet and somebody who played the drums, we'd play Christmas carols. So I enjoyed music along the way. As a grade schooler, I played the piano first and then the cello. And I was in a family of four kids, and we all played piano first, and we all played another musical instrument to follow. And so I had a music background that served me well. I was probably in my 30s when I started playing guitar and doing a little more songwriting, and uh, and so enjoyed that journey very much. You introduced me as a cowboy, so I will correct you to say I've never been a cowboy, but I have been a cowboy poet. Uh, and I'm going to tell you that story for a little bit. The one day, my daughter must have been around 20, and I saw that there was a cowboy poetry gathering event concert going on near my house in Colorado, and I invited her to come with me, and we went and watched cowboy poetry that evening. And I was intrigued.
mhm.
I think I probably saw a cowboy poet on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show years before that, but it just kind of seeped in. And didn't give it a second thought, but 6, 7, 8 months later, I woke up early one morning, like 4 in the morning, and at my kitchen table came a cowboy poem from beginning to end,
Out of you.
out of me onto paper. And
Wow.
and I kind of sat back and thought, where did that come from? Well, I went on to write a second poem and a song, and they had a Western theme, like a cowboy theme. And a year after that event that I took my daughter to, I was able to go to the same event and play at an open microphone and do my one poem and my one song. And one of the cowboys said, "Come on out to Nebraska. I like your stuff. Let's." So I have been on the journey of a cowboy poetry um, career since that time. Very accidentally, very much having a muse speak into my ear and help to create the Western stories. And of course, I'm paying attention as I go to those events and learning as I go. And the so it's been a delightful journey, a better than average day job for as musician day jobs go. But But expanding on that story, I'm going to tell you a second story. When I left work on Friday and went to a cowboy poetry gathering, I didn't tell anybody where I was going.
Oh.
That life was completely separate from my doctor life. And when I came back on Monday morning, I didn't. When I got to the cowboy gathering, I didn't tell anybody what I did during the week. And I was pretty darn secretive about it, secretive to a fault. And one night, playing music around a fire, midnight, and one of the cowboys said, "Al, tell us what you do for a living." And I said, "You know what? I don't talk about it much, DW." And he looked me in the eye and he said, I know you don't talk about it much, but you're going to talk about it now.
Oh no.
And so I said, well, turns out I'm a doctor. And several other people in the circle kind of reacted big and said, oh my gosh, he's a doctor. And that's kind of what I'd been trying to avoid all this time. But DW, this cowboy from Montana, just stared me down. And as everybody else quieted down, he said, well, I think you're making a mistake. And I said, what do you mean, DW? He said, I think you're making a mistake. Every Western outfit has a doc. You should be doc. You don't have to tell people what you do for a living, but when you show up, I think you should be doc. And
There
so
you are.
since that time, when I perform, I'm Doc Mel, and my website is Doc Mel, and so I follow DW's advice, and I still don't talk at the cowboy poetry gatherings. I still don't talk very much about my work life as a physician, and now retired from that work life. But it's been a wonderful springboard, and I've met an amazing circle of friends in the cowboy poetry arena, and so there that gives you a little thumbnail sketch of my journey.
I wonder if you could have told him like you were a gunslinger or something. With
Well,
the-
I'll, as I was walking out one of the events, I remember one of the women poets, Ann Socket was her name, and she introduced me from stage, and she even said, "Al won't tell me what he does for a living." And then she finished introducing me, and I performed. And as we were all walking out, oh, an old half-crippled cowboy was walking out beside me as we leave, and he says, "I know why you won't tell us what you do for a living." And I said, "Well, why's that, sir?" He said, I'll bet you're rodeo. I just figured I'd go with that for a while.
maybe you had a spring in your step since he didn't have one.
That's right.
Well, tell us what it's like to perform on stage at an event like that, where you do your, because that's very, putting yourself out there, Doc. I mean, you're being vulnerable to someone listening to you perform original material.
Uh, the I've been it's been the vulnerable is a good word because in my heart I knew I was very much an interloper at these cowboy poetry events and not a cowboy. Now I bring a oh my father was grew up on a farm, and I bring a sensibility about the land and about the life in the West, and so in that sense I guess I half belonged there, but I was I was it was easy enough to make a mistake. You don't know what you don't know, and I'd write a line that just didn't work, and I have to thank uh, I guess I brought enough skill to the writing that some of the cowboys would correct my mistakes kindly, softly, behind stage, and and I had a poem where the word mare would a female horse would be a good rhyme, and I'd put that rhyme in my poem, and I did that poem in a small audience on a small stage, and one of the cowboys said, when it's a branding, we none of us are going to show up on a mare because we're going to be on a stallion or a gelding because you're just causing trouble around the other horses if you show up on a mare. Now he said, I think in California they do that sometimes, but none of us are going to. You better change that word in your poem. And so that's one example of 1,000 where I had the good fortune of good friends who helped me along the way. Now. Uh, in addition to not having the cowboy credentials, anytime you get on stage and perform an original piece, there's that sense of nervousness and butterflies and uh, and the poetry in particular. Boy, I found that you could recite it 100 times on a walk around the house or on a drive down the highway. But the first time on stage, it was so easy to forget a line. Um, so there was a good, an edgy nervousness about that I think is true of any performance situation. But the poetry in particular, you're very naked. You're not standing behind a guitar. You can't play a guitar solo while you're trying to remember the words to the next line. You can't repeat the chorus. And so the poetry in particular, there's a nervousness about that. But in addition, boy, there's just as with any performance, singing, songwriting, poetry, acting, uh, there's sometimes liken it to I've never been a surfer, but I can imagine if a surfer gets on a wave that's a little unexpectedly big, and you just have that joy of riding the energy of that wave, and I find that's true when an audience brings their emotional feedback to the material that you're presenting. So that's a thrill.
Well, speaking of performing, would you read or play some of your work for us today? We'd love to hear
I'd
it.
be happy to. I'll start with a piece that's about in central Kansas, where my father grew up, where and we go back and visit the grandparents. And I remember playing on little posts in the ground that were part of their front walkway and fence, but the posts were made of rock. And and I didn't give it much thought until 35 years later. I was driving my son home from college back on the East Coast, and as we were flying through Kansas, I saw these rock fence posts go flying by the interstate. I thought, I remember those. And so I wrote a poem about the fence posts made of stone. In the heart of central Kansas, near my daddy's boyhood home, there are miles and miles of fences where the posts are made of stone. In the middle of the Great Plains, where a tree could scarce be found, men carved out limestone pillars and they sunk them in the ground. Now, when the prairie winds come blowing, those posts don't seem to care, as the wires strung between them dance like jump ropes in the air. And standing at attention, their shoulders never tire as they hold to either side of them those strands of old barbed wire. Those posts have stood 100 years. They'll stand 1,000 more. And when the wires rust away, folks might wonder what they're for, but lined up in formation, dressed in limestone grays and whites, they do more than form a boundary. They salute a way of life. They line a road paved with persistence. Not just a homestead, but a dream about a family's subsistence. Those fence posts paint a scene. It's a wagon loaded down with stone. A Morgan fights the rains. A young man wet with sweat is building fence out on the plains. So, when I think I've had a hard day, as I haul myself back home, well, I just remember Grandpa setting fence posts made of stone.
That was beautiful. I love how you have that rhythm, that cadence, and I believe you're married to a fellow poet who also has a lot of rhythm in her writing as well. How hard is it to come up with the cadence, especially performing it?
Uh, well, good question, because Doris and I, we've had the great fortune to find each other in the second half of our lives, and we're married about 8 years ago, and we met somewhere backstage on the cowboy poetry circuit. Might have been Valentine, Nebraska, might have been Arvada, Colorado, uh, and then a year later, oh, it's you again. Nice to meet you. And so we had a wonderful, very gradual friendship that became a marriage, and it's such a delight. And both our own sensibility about the writing, but importantly, the genre of cowboy poetry has a high premium on rhyming word and a
Mhm.
high premium on meter, on the cadence, and the and so Doris in her journey and me in my journey, both of us find that a beautiful, wonderful, enriching challenge to write with high level of attention to rhyme. We I can't say I've never used an almost rhyme, a slant rhyme, but boy, I try not to, say as does Doris. And the meter is, as you could hear from that recitation, the meter is exact on the page, or I like it to try to be, but I try not to speak it in a stifling drumbeat way.
Right.
And so I think then the the exact meter, the syllables, the drum beat that you hear is half hidden, but at least half of your brain sees through that notices it there and grasps onto that to the meter. Uh, Years ago, this must have been in high school. We were must have been studying a book about Puritan America and the Puritans who settled on the east coast of America, and it might have been the Scarlet Letter or something like that. And I remember hearing about the puritanical religious structure that was so binding. And the Puritans had a term that caught my ear. It said freedom from submission. And they were talking about submitting to these religious rules. But but I noticed this that if there's submission to a rhyming poem, if you submit to a rhyming structure, if you submit to the requirement that the meter has to be exact, then it opens up a whole new avenue of creativity, freedom from submission. And so, without trying to sort of walk down a religious trail here, I notice that saying when I think, yeah, I'm committed to a rhyming poem. I'm committed to trying to get the meter exactly right, and uh, and that is part of my creative process, especially in the cowboy poetry world.
Well, it's a very disciplined type of writing where it's not so much free verse or, spontaneous eruption kind of thing. It's where you're actually following a form, and it really does open up a whole new world because you have to be committed to that to be able to finish the product.
And in this genre, in cowboy poetry, now I will say there are free verse cowboy poets, not very many, and
Hmm.
some we admire greatly, and it's a skill that I'm intrigued by. But the tradition comes from stories told around a campfire, and the very young men who were cowboys moving cattle from northern Mexico and Texas up to the railheads in the late 1800s. And many of them, most of them were illiterate.
Mm.
And but at night, before they finally fell asleep, they'd tell stories to each other by the campfire. And if you could put the story in rhyme, you could remember it easier.
Right.
And so this tradition of poetry by the fires, recited by cowboys to each other, this cowboy poetry tradition leans heavily on rhyme. And it always has. And it's a beautiful element of the tradition. And so I found myself along that same path. I have written free verse poetry and haiku poetry, and of late I'm writing more of that, but still writing rhymed and metered poetry in the cowboy genre as well.
Well, what projects are you currently working on?
Well, I'll tell you about a few, and I'm gonna use that as a jumping point to I pulled aside one of the poems I just wrote recently and had published in Rattle magazine. Rattle is a great contemporary poetry magazine. Thank
I
you.
clap, I
And
clap because if you can get into rattle, it is like the mecca of poetry these days because it's very hard to get into rattle. So I applaud you completely.
well, thank you. Well, they had an edition 4 or 5 years ago that they recruited cowboy poetry, and so that was my first publication there, and I've had a couple of others. But this particular poem is does not have the structure of rhyme that cowboy poetry does. And I'm gonna read it for you because it jumps off of the topic we just talked about. So as I was writing this poem and moving about it, but I was writing it about poems that don't rhyme.
Uh-huh.
And so in writing this poem, I put a rhyming word, just like you would in a couplet. The last word in the first line would rhyme with the last word of the second line. But I took that rhyming word from the end of the second line and I put it at the beginning of the second line
Okay.
as kind of a shock. And so it's just about 10 or 12 lines long, and I'm gonna try it for you now. Poems used to rhyme. Poems used to rhyme. In time, the couplets were dispensed. Incensed, today's poet rebels from rhyming schemes, it seems. The writer, newly shedding the shackles of quatrains, refrains from even a modicum of lilt, and built now from unpaired diphthongs, his songs have lost a measure of glue. It's true. No longer does the ear delight in flight of fancy, in teeter-totter like water on the endless sand, the to and fro. And no, this tide will not abate. Of late, I find that poems no longer draw me in. They're thin. Thank you. I got some really nice feedback from other readers of Rattle Magazine who said, "Oh, thanks for writing a poem about rhymes. I miss rhyming poetry." So so that was fun. And uh, I'll talk about some other projects in the works, but partly I'll speak to that topic through embarrassment. Oh gosh, I've been in a lull. And so even saying yes to today's interview, I thought that's gonna that's gonna be the spark that gets me restarted a little bit. I have we moved houses about a year ago, and so we've had this last year of just getting the house reorganized. And I have one room in our newly refinished basement. I thought I'm going to set up some recording studio stuff. I have a lot of songs that I've written but not recorded. I don't know if they're going to become an album or just I just want to get them
Oh,
finished in a way that I can say that song is finished, and maybe it'll become part of a future project. Maybe it won't, but if it isn't finished, it's never going to become part of a project. So I'm just leaning into that job now that the house move is wrapping up and feels like we're at home finally in this house. We only moved 3 miles down the road. It should sounds easier. It sounds like ought to be easy, but as everyone knows, we are still unpacking boxes from the move. Uh, the in the writing, so that's in the singing and songwriting world. In the writing world, I'm embarrassed to say that the my routine is not what writers should have. I wait for the muse to knock on my door to wake me up in the night and tell me what to write down an idea. And so I've got a collection of half thoughts and two phrases and a sentence and a half that I need to that are all waiting for me to kind of flesh start fleshing those out and figure out the ones which deserve to be finished. Um, the we've got both Doris and I have some performances coming up. Those are always nice to have as an anchor store on the calendar. So there's a beautiful cowboy poetry gathering in Caroline, Alberta. That's a few hours from our home, and that's in September. There's another one in east of Edmonton in the month of July that we'll both be performing in. And you know, those are also like today's interviewed, those always get the juices flowing to sort of maybe write a song on the way home, or write a new poem while you're back in the green room, or get a new idea from someone else on stage that helps you, nudges you in the right direction. So those projects are kind of in the works. I'm playing with I played, as I mentioned, in grade school. I played some music. My instrument in grade school was the cello, so I'm still playing the cello. I've
wow.
got a band I play with. We're all so old that one of the guys said, "I think we should be called the Fossils." And I pushed back. I said, "I know we're old, but that's just harsh. Let's call ourselves the Relics." So we're the Relics. And so I play the cello and sing some in that group, and we're having a lot of fun with that. And so that's been a beautiful part of our journey. Uh, Doris and I have the great pleasure of trying to give back when we can, and so she plays the piano, I play the cello. We take our music to our local church from time to time. We play at the seniors' home down the road from our house, and so those are little uh, regular entries on our calendar that just kind of keep the creative spirit alive, and also the spirit of sort of giving to community and and making a joyful noise.
What advice were you given, or if you were given anything as a writer that has helped you and might help an aspiring writer who may be like, be in a lull or not quite got that juice going.
I wish I could model myself up in a way that I could be proud to tell other writers how to do it. I'm going to tell other writers how not to do it.
Okay.
I I really do write when the muse visits me, and I can't explain that. The some of my poems, as I mentioned, that very first poem that came out on the kitchen table, I can't explain that. I wrote that poem when I was in my late 30s, maybe 40s. Uh, I hadn't written a poem since grade school, and 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 in a lightning flash, a poem appeared on the page with my hand holding the pencil. I've had that happen quite a few times. So I tell other writers, don't follow my example. It's a bad way to be a writer. Having said that, I suppose if the muse visits you, be sure to write it down. I do find that if I get an idea and if I can carve out some time right away, some of those songs will finish themselves on the day they started themselves, or the poem will finish itself. And that doesn't mean it doesn't get some editing and some revision and a little twist later, but sometimes the my best writing has been to just let the muse put the pen to paper and write fast while the ideas are flowing. And so of all the ideas that you might hear a writer tell you, I keep a journal every day. I don't. I'm I, I w- I'm not proud of that.
That is
But I
okay
write I write very sporadically, but when it happens, I try to
to
move
listen.
move the rest of life aside and allow it to flow and make the most of it. I will admit it leaves me with a lot of unfinished projects. I have an unfinished novel in mind. I have an unfinished advice to parents but from the doctor book in mind. And not in mind, but maybe 100 pages written, but it's a 200-page book. So I guess I guess my advice to writers is at some point finish your projects. Even if you finish the project and say it didn't turn out as good as I thought it would, I think I often make the mistake and look to make the mistake less often of having a project unfinished and thinking the muse must appear one of these days and finish it for me. And I think that's a risk that I have found myself suffering from and hope to break out of.
Well, Doc, in the future, 300 years when people are going back and they're listening and watching your YouTube, which are now holograms, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, that's a great question. Um, I'm uh, privileged to have had a career that it in itself gives me a sense of legacy in having touched the lives of a lot of families in my
Hmm.
doctor career. And I so I feel very honored to already have put that on the mantelpiece and be able to feel that and notice that and be proud of that. Um, I love the idea that some of my creativity has made it onto the paper, has made it into a book, has made it into Rattle Magazine, has been recorded as a CD. Um, and so whatever form that takes someday. Well, maybe it will take no form someday. How many writers' works are lost forever? How many CDs of perfectly good creative work never live on in any way?
Right.
Most, 99%. Um, Doris and I took a trip to Ireland about 2 years ago, and we were having coffee in a little outdoor bistro, and there was a rock wall with little sayings etched into tiles that had been embedded in the rocks, and one caught my attention, and it said, "Don't die with the music still inside you." And I must admit that nudges me to get into my little recording area here in the basement and try to get some of those songs recorded and get the book written that's only half written. Um, to say, and if likely it will only be a legacy in my own mind, but maybe one of my kids will keep it on the bookshelf, and maybe the grandkids will enjoy it down the road, and the great grandkids. But I guess my goal is at least it's not still inside me. If I can somehow get it on paper, get it recorded, say my creative impulse might live on, at least in my head, it's now recorded in a way that it might.
Well, and Doc, I've heard, you can't give from an empty cup. And it sounds like your cup is so brimming to the full that throughout your whole life you've given. And I thank you for that. And thank you for being with us at Briar House Writes today. It's been a pure honor to meet you. And I wish you all
Becky,
the best in the future.
it's been a delight. Thank you. Thank you very much.